Welcome to the INFOWARS Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's Friday, April the 12th, 2013, and here are our top stories.
Tonight, treason alert. Democrats try to move gun bill forward without allowing senators to read it. Then, a shocking UN report covers up Barack Obama's role in arming terrorists. And who gave North Korea nukes in the first place? Find out tonight on the INFOWARS Nightly News.
Well, in a tactic we've seen before when Obamacare was passed, we now see the Democrats with their next signature transformation of our society, gun control, doing the same thing. That is, introducing a giant bill and trying to cram it through before anybody really knows what's in it. Or as Nancy Pelosi says, we have to pass it so we can find out what's in it.
These are the rights that we're trying to protect by requiring a 60-vote threshold on any new gun control legislation. And in so doing, we're trying to prevent the ability of members to push through legislation before anyone has had time to read and evaluate the language. And yet, as of this morning, as of this very moment, not a single senator has been provided the legislative text of that very provision.
Well, that effort by Senator Mike Lee and Senator Rand Paul to try to slow things down so that people know exactly what's in this failed. And it failed with the help of 16 Republicans. In an article on INFOWARS, Treason Alert, Democrats try to move gun bill forward without allowing senators to read it. You'll see a list there, the 16 senators. And there's some quotes there that are kind of interesting. Mike Lee says, "We're trying to prevent the ability of members to push through legislation before anyone has had time to read and evaluate the language. As of this morning, as of this very moment, not a single senator has been provided the legislative text." And even Dianne Feinstein said, well, I haven't seen the bill, so I'm going to reserve my concerns. I only know what people have told me. We've seen this all before. We saw it with Obamacare. And we've seen what we're seeing here, and take a look at these 16 senators here, because these are the senators that I like to call, many of them are the NDAA wing of the Republican Party. These are people like Richard Burr out of North Carolina, Lindsey Graham, John McCain, and joined in all of this is a new senator, Pat Toomey, relatively new, who has joined with Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, and they've put forward a background check bill into this that is something that we should all be very concerned about. Even the ACLU is concerned about a national registry, and when you have the ACLU, no friend of the Second Amendment, joining with the NRA, concerned about the civil liberties ramifications of this, that's something you should be worried about. But these are senators who are not concerned about our civil liberties. They've come after the Fourth Amendment. They don't care about your right to be searched in the airports. They don't care about your due process in the Sixth Amendment. They put up the NDAA. And now they're coming after the Second Amendment. And these are senators who, like Senator Burr out of North Carolina, I know from having lived in North Carolina that he voted for TARP, is also a supporter of NDAA, and he even introduced and sponsored a bill to punish whistleblowers. We don't want anybody like Bradley Manning who's going to tell us what the government is really up to. Those types of people need to be punished severely, according to Richard Burr. Well, we've got also some information about what amendments may be coming up on this, and this is something we need to watch closely. Harry Reid has said he's going to keep the amendment process open, and Roll Call magazine talks about some of the things that may be coming up, some of the amendments that may be coming up. Some of these are good amendments, possibly won't be passed. The first one is a concealed carry amendment, which would essentially stop people who have a concealed carry permit from being harangued if they travel into a state like New York, for example. A lot of people have run afoul of New York laws because they had weapons in their trunk that were safely stored that other states would recognize, or because of their concealed carry, they're not allowed to carry in New York. It becomes a tripwire, traveling from state to state and having different gun laws in each of those states. But number 2 on this list is one of the things I want to take a quick look at, and that's the mental health records provision. Now, this is something that is being put forward by a lot of Republicans, and Democrats are backing away from this. But also is supported by the NRA. But I find it troubling, and we should all be very concerned about this push to try to deflect some of the regulations onto people who are mentally disturbed, for example. As we pointed out, the people who are doing these mass shootings are typically on psychotropic drugs that are prescribed by the psychiatric people, and this is something that, you know, they're expanding this to get people and trap people that have just had antidepressant medication, and to expand that to everybody that's in their family. So this is something that we really need to be concerned about, because this is something that is having the guns taken away from people who are not found guilty of a crime or a felony. They're just people who have been reported by a psychiatrist or mental health official, and we need to be very concerned about that. Even if the NRA supports that, I don't think that is something that we should be comfortable with, that people lose their due process. Also in there are, as a third thing in this list, is armed prosecutors being, it's a possible amendment that may come in, that is, armed prosecutors may be allowed to carry weapons, because we've just had two recent shootings here in Texas. One of them a prosecutor, a judge, and another law enforcement person. They're going to give, though, special favors to law enforcement personnel. They're going to be a special class of person. So while you and I will lose our rights to keep and bear arms, we're going to see law enforcement officials at the state and federal level get special privileges, and not only would they be allowed to carry weapons, but this proposed amendment would allow them to carry and obtain any ammunition magazine of any size. So we see all kinds of exemptions being put in for government officials. We see essentially a two-class structure here of who is allowed to own firearms and who isn't. But don't worry about that. According to Biden, this is all just in your imagination, and they would never take away your firearms. Remember, he made those promises early on, but now he says anybody that's concerned about gun control, about gun confiscation, about losing your gun rights, that's part of the black helicopter crowd. And Jakari Jackson has a report on that.
Let me read some of the things they're saying about background checks. They say, quote, "We, the federal government, want to put every private firearms transaction right under the thumb of the federal government and keep all those names in a massive federal registry." Kind of scary, man. Black helicopter crowd really is upset.
I'm Jakari Jackson with an INFOWARS News Bulletin. Vice President Joe Biden is once again criticizing those concerned about their Second Amendment rights, calling them, quote, the black helicopter crowd. Now, INFOWARS has well documented how black helicopters are very much real and active in the United States.
Helicopters and the sound of gunfire created a lot of concern this afternoon in one Houston neighborhood.
It's a joint military training exercise involving local police, also military, as someone shot some video of some of these choppers, military-style choppers.
If you see military helicopters flying low over Minneapolis, do not be alarmed. They are training in an urban environment. The U.S. Special Operations Command will be conducting these exercises until the beginning of September.
Now let's take a look at a different part of Biden's speech, where he says not only is there no FBI database of firearm purchases, according to him, the FBI shreds purchase information immediately after processing.
And within 24 hours of being told that you can sell that gun, the FBI must destroy the information. There is no record kept.
And this reporter may have been fooled by Biden's rhetoric had it not been for these articles. Even Congress wants to know what the NSA is doing with its $2 billion Utah spy center, ATF to spy on gun owners via massive database, Big Sis Snitch program to help enforce gun control, U.S. to let spy agencies scour Americans' finances, and Utah welcomes NSA Mega Snoop Center. But you say, well, none of those were the FBI. We can still trust the FBI, right? Well, let's take a look at these articles. FBI caught lying to spy on reporters. FBI caught lying about carrier IQ spying. And FBI made up threats at peace rally, lied to Congress to justify spying activity. And just in case you think Biden misspoke like Mrs. Clinton when she misspoke about having to dodge sniper fire, let's take a look at these clips of Biden saying he did not vote for war.
They talk about this Great Recession if it fell out of the sky, like, oh my goodness, where did it come from? It came from this man voting to put 2 wars in a credit card, to at the same time put a prescription drug benefit in the credit card, a $1 trillion tax cut for very wealthy. I was there. I voted against them. I said, no, we can't afford that. I was there. I voted against them.
I said, no, we can't afford that.
And if that didn't convince you, let's take a look at his actual Senate voting records. So there you have it, documented proof that we can trust Joe Biden, who never lied about guns or wars or anything else. The government loves us and wants us to do well, so thank you, Joe Biden, for pointing that out. I'm Jakari Jackson with an InfoWars News Bulletin.
I said, no, we can't afford that.
Well, in a report from WorldNet Daily, they report that the UN covers up Obama's role in arming terrorists. That's right. During a fight against Gaddafi's regime in 2011, it was widely reported that the Obama administration coordinated foreign arms shipments via cutouts to Libyan rebels. And in the UN cases, both proven and under investigation, there were illicit transfers from Libya to more than 12 countries, and also to terror and criminal groups, including heavy and light weapons, man-portable air defense systems, small arms and related ammunition and explosives, and mines. Now, this is all relevant to what's going on with the gun control debate, actually, because the UN Arms Trade Treaty that is currently going through, and that is the thing that's really pushing for registration and background checks. There's essentially a double push. There's a domestic push that's being led by the Democrats and by the Sandy Hook and the Aurora shootings, but there's also a UN Arms Trade Treaty, and both of them are trying to achieve the same objective, and that is gun registration and background checks on a much larger scale than we've ever seen before. And the justification for that is to crack down, the UN Arms Trade Treaty's justification is to crack down on arms that are flowing across borders. And yet, the strange thing is that we see that it is the United States government that is moving arms across borders. We saw that in the Fast and Furious false flag attack that they were setting up, and CBS pointed out that it was set up to attack the Second Amendment. And now we see that the UN and the U.S. government were supplying arms to Libyan rebels to take down Gaddafi, and that these arms are now going to countries that we're supposedly terrorist countries that we're at war with. So because they ship these arms out to terrorist countries, and because they ship arms across the borders, we're supposed to lose all of our rights. We're supposed to lose our Second Amendment rights, as well as our Fourth Amendment rights and our Sixth Amendment rights because of the war on terror. And now we're supposed to lose our Second Amendment rights. And these are all threats of things that are happening that our government itself is doing. They're moving the arms across borders. We see the same thing happening in Korea, actually. There's an article that came out today that we covered on InfoWars. Who gave North Korea nukes in the first place? We're told that we have to go to war against North Korea, that we have to attack them. People are calling for a preemptive attack against North Korea, but it bears looking at to see where did they get these in the first place. Former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld presided over a $200 million contract to deliver equipment and services to build 2 light water reactor stations in North Korea in January 2000 when he was an executive director of ABB. Wolfram Eberhardt, a spokesman for ABB, confirmed that Rumsfeld was at nearly all the board meetings during his involvement with the company. And Rumsfeld was merely picking up the baton from the Clinton administration, who in 1994 agreed to replace North Korea's domestically built nuclear reactors with light water nuclear reactors. Now, they said at the time that these nuclear reactors were not anything that could be used to make nuclear bombs. But Henry Sokolowski, head of the Non-Proliferation Policy Education Center in Washington, said otherwise. He said these reactors, like all reactors, have the potential to make weapons. So you might end up supplying the worst nuclear violator with the means to acquire the very weapons we're trying to prevent from acquiring it. So we see that at the same time, the government who is supplying terrorists, who has created Al-Qaeda, tells us that we have to lose all of our rights to protect us from Al-Qaeda. The government who ships arms across borders tells us that we have to be registered and identified as gun owners because We don't want arms being shipped across the border. And now the UN is, now we're told that we have to go to war against North Korea because they have nuclear weapons, which Rumsfeld and the Clinton administration gave to them and okayed to sell to them in the first place. It's kind of the same story repeated over and over again. Well, some interesting news came out today about what it takes to actually hijack a plane. You don't have to actually be on the plane. You don't have to have box cutters, or you don't have to have a lot of liquid to hijack a plane. No, actually you can do it from an Android phone. Yes, a hacker used an Android to remotely attack and hijack a plane. In a practical demonstration of how to remotely attack and take full control of an aircraft, this seminar, Hack in a Box security conference, they said the complete attack will be accomplished remotely without needing physical access to the target aircraft at any time, and a testing laboratory will be used to attack virtual airplane systems. The person doing this said that once he's into the airplane's computer, he's able to manipulate the steering of a Boeing jet while the aircraft was in autopilot mode. And the only countermeasure available to pilots, if they even realize they're being hacked, would be to turn off the autopilot. Yet many planes no longer have old analog instruments for manual flying. Tesco, the person doing the hacking, said that he could take control of most all airplane systems, and he could even cause the plane to crash by setting it on a collision course with another plane, or perhaps with a collision course with a skyscraper. Who knows? It's interesting, I find, that if you look at Operation Northwoods, they were talking about remotely controlling airplanes and staging a false flag terrorist attack back in the 1960s. And we didn't see anything about any remote control technology until really after September 11th. And then it was all over the place. We saw everything about Predator drones and global hawk drones that were spying on people used for surveillance. That became kind of a large part of the narrative of the Afghanistan war right after September 11th. That didn't just pop on the scene any more than the X-ray machines at the airports just popped on the scene conveniently after the underwear bomber. No, these things are in the pipeline for a very long time, especially if it's something that is militarily developed. And you can bet that if somebody can do that today with an Android, 10 years ago there was technology that the Pentagon had where they could do that. And it's not just airplanes that they're hacking, it's also mines that they're hacking. There's a lot of stories lately about mind control and brain control, and just the last several days we've had stories about artificial brain, we've had stories about robotic brains using nanotechnology to let them be self-aware and autonomously make their own decisions. And now we see a story about, from Popular Science, a Harvard neuroscience scheme to change decisions in your brain. Volunteers were told that they could press a button whenever they'd liked to remember the position of a clock's second hand at the moment they decided to act. 5 seconds before the volunteers reported that they had decided to press the button, the scientists noted electrical activity in the area of the brain involved in initiating movement. Now that scientist, Kryman, is taking that experiment a step further. As soon as he sees a telltale brain activity that signals a decision to push the button, he flashes a stop sign on a screen in front of the volunteer. So far, all we have is people saying, "That's weird, how did you read my mind?" So no mind control yet, but just a bit of harmless mind reading according to Popular Science. It may not be all that harmless. When the government is doing these many experiments openly on mind control, and mind control experiments, of course, go back again to the 1960s, to MK Ultra, to the LSD experiments that the CIA was doing. This stuff, though, is coming out into the forefront quite a bit now. We're seeing a lot of stories about this, and the implications of this are very troubling, especially in this case. They're looking at not only telling in advance the decisions that someone is going to make, but also changing their mind, manipulating them in that way. Well, from hacking planes and from hacking minds, we're going to have a report now from Kristen Megan about hacking the environment.
I want to tell you a little story about my previous identity. In my previous identity, I'm known as Sergeant Kristen Edwards. Throughout my career, I was stationed all over the nation, all over the world. I started out in England. My job was in bioenvironmental engineering. When I was at Tinker Air Force Base, Oklahoma, I heard about geoengineering. And I thought, oh, those crazy conspiracy loons. I'm sure we've all heard of Alex Jones from INFOWARS.com. Yeah. The man I once thought was a loon, wearing a tinfoil hat, living in a bunker, that I just shunned off as, you know, this guy doesn't get it. Did he strap on a uniform? Has he gone out there and defended his country? Well, part of my job in bioenvironmental engineering was to approve hazardous materials that came on the base. I sat at a computer and I approved those hazardous materials on base and tied them to a process and a building. So when I started approving what is called an Air Force Form 3952, the approval of hazardous materials, and I started seeing barium, aluminum oxide, and strontium come on the base from a contractor whose name was not listed, which was not normal, I started to realize that those crazy tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorists might not be so crazy. I lived about less than a mile behind the flight line at Tinker Air Force Base, Oklahoma, in Oklahoma City. And due to my background as an industrial hygienist and an environmental specialist, I conducted soil grid sampling and grain sampling. Those of you who may not be too privy to chemistry, you know that there's natural elements occurring in Earth. Aluminum is one of them. However, barium, radioactive, and strontium are not. So I conducted those samples and saw limits in my community that would make your head spin. And I started to realize that those peers within my professional community that were trying to wake those of us in the military up were right. In 2009, late 2009, I stumbled upon something that changed my life. I ran across an operation at Warner Robins Air Force Base, which was exposing thousands of civilians to carcinogens. People were getting sick. People were getting cancer. People had sores in their mouth from something called strontium chromate, or chrome-6, a carcinogenic metal used in military operations. So after what I saw at Tinker Air Force Base, Oklahoma, and then what I saw at Warner Robins Air Force Base, Georgia, everything that I knew, everything that I thought I knew, this great nation, we are heroes. I had 4 stripes on my arm and 11 medals and ribbons on my chest. I thought I was protecting my homeland. And I'd ask you that are veterans, or any of you that are civilian, what do you do in your careers? Do you work in the medical profession? Do you work in an airport? Where do you work? And what do you see? Because I guarantee you, if you step back and you connect those dots, you will see things that never made sense to you before. If you know someone who's in the military now, or you know a veteran, engage them. It's your due diligence. Whether you or not you agree with, quote, conspiracy websites like INFOWARS.com or Prison Planet, or whether you believe in geoengineering or chemtrails, please believe me because I saw it firsthand, okay? This is not what I want to be known for. It's a huge target on my back. I ask you to ask those veterans in your family or those friends and ask them to rise up, as Robbie Wells says. Do your part. Defend your nation. Join Oath Keepers. Get in touch with all the alternative media outlets. Support the acts and musicians. You guys, it all matters. I have people tell me, why do you do what you do? There's nothing we can do about it. I know the TSA is unconstitutional, but what can we do about it? Well, let me tell you, I've done things about it, okay? I've shot documentaries. I've done TV shows. I have things in the works I can't even mention so that they don't get edited before they air. You can do something about it. So just remember these numbers. 2001. I thought I was doing good. 4 stripes on my arm, 11 medals on my chest. One day to change my life. What day will be yours? Because trust me, it will come. It will directly affect you, and you will remember this. So please, rise up, do your due diligence, do your own investigations, and support your military by educating them.
Well, the stories we've covered tonight are not the kind of stories that you're typically going to see in the media. They've got their own agenda. And abortion is actually part of their agenda. You know, if we had a situation where we had 3,000 people killed in a day, that might be a really big news story, wouldn't it? It might be something on the order of September 11th. But that is what happens every day with abortions. We have that many lives lost every day through abortion. And not only that, but if we had a story, imagine if we had a story where there were heinous details about decapitation and mutilation, that might also make the news. But it's not making the news in the Philadelphia abortion trial of Dr. Gosnell. The media is not reporting some of these things. Listen to this. Infant beheadings, severed baby feet in jars, a child screaming after it was delivered alive during an abortion procedure. Haven't heard about these sickening accusations? Well, it's not your fault because it's not being covered in the media. We have quotes from people who have worked as staff there who say that it would rain fetuses and blood all over the place. That's what he said in the trial. But here's the headline that the Associated Press put on their story about the testimony that saw 100 babies born and then snipped. He says, the headline read, "Staffer describes chaos at Pennsylvania abortion clinic." And that last picture that you saw up there, the empty benches, those are benches that are reserved for the media to cover this trial. Yeah, that's right. You don't see anybody there, do you? Well, it also said in this op-ed piece, and this actually came from USA Today, surprisingly, they said a LexisNexis search shows that none of the news shows on the 3 major network television stations has mentioned the Gosnell trial in the last 3 months. The only exception was when they were talking about anti-abortion laws, and Peggy Noonan threw this into the mix, so it wasn't even planned. Well, we're going to be talking about media bias right after the break. We've got a couple of people here on the staff that you don't normally see in front of the camera, and they're going to tell you about the National Association of Broadcasters, and they're going to tell you about some stories they saw there, as well as what they saw about media consolidation. We'll be right back after the break. Stick with us.
Ted Anderson, president of Midas Resources. With over 30 years of experience in the precious metals business, I can tell you without a doubt, we are facing the most dangerous and volatile times, not just in the United States, but worldwide. Peace of mind is gold and silver. Now is the time to invest in gold. When it comes to bullion coins, our prices are competitive and the closest to melt. If it's numismatics you're looking for, we have some of the best deals out there. Visit MidasResources.com today or go to INFOWARS.com and click on the link to see our daily specials. Here's an example of one of our long-term specials we've been offering for more than a year. 2 silver dollars from the turn of the last century, plus 2 powerful films, The Obama Deception and The American Dream. We also add in the book Dishonest Money, all for $72 and free shipping. The most trusted name in precious metals is Midas Resources. Call 1-800-686-2237 or go to INFOWARS.com. I'm Ted Anderson with Midas Resources.
We are now only entering the edge of a global financial superstorm, the likes of which the planet has never seen. Here in the United States, the private Federal Reserve is giving more than $85 billion of taxpayer money a month to themselves and other offshore foreign banks. And the worst part is, we have to pay the bank's interest on the money we give them. There is now a race between the global central bank mafia cartels to see who can devalue their country's currencies the fastest. We are already seeing big increases in inflation at the grocery store and the gas line. This will eventually lead to hyperinflation. More than a dozen top globalists like George Soros have been buying record amounts of gold while at the same time bad-mouthing it to the public. Don't just listen to what they say. Watch what they do. For more than 6,000 years of recorded human history, gold has been the ultimate hedge against uncertain times and inflation. Before investing in metals, it is important to do your own research and find a reputable company. Midas Resources has the highest Better Business Bureau rating of an A+. Unfortunately, very few precious metal companies can boast that. Midas Resources has assembled one of the most educated, researched, and professional teams of brokers in the industry. The evidence is overwhelming. In uncertain times, gold and silver is safe harbor. Now is the time to invest in gold. Call 800-686-2237 and Midas Resources will mail you 10 reasons to own gold absolutely free. No shipping. It's absolutely free. And finally, Ted Anderson wants to challenge you to find any deal that comes close to his 2 silver dollars at cost with free shipping, with 2 free films and a book for $72. That's more than $160 value for $72 shipping included. Click the link at INFOWARS.com to go to the MidasResources.com specials page. Brought to you by MidasResources.com and Ted Anderson the trusted name in precious metals.
Well, as I talked about earlier, the media exercises a great deal of control in just what they decide to report on. Not only what they say, but even the stories they decide to cover, just as they did not they're not covering the abortion trial in Philadelphia. We have a couple of our crew here who went to Las Vegas this last week to the National Association of Broadcasters convention there, and they noticed something very interesting. We're going to let them tell you about that right now. It's John Bound and Marcus Morales. Welcome, guys.
Hey, good to be here, David.
Tell us a little bit about that trip, what you saw there.
Well, you know, Vegas is always an interesting place to go. But we went there to the National Association of Broadcasters, which is a convention. The association itself began in 1922. It was a radio broadcasting association, and it gradually included television and elements of film and radio.
And it's pretty much the place to go to if you want to look at anything that has to do with broadcasting, television or radio now. Everything as far as equipment is there, right?
It's incredibly impressive. Everything is there. We walked forever. Our feet got incredibly tired, but it was so interesting that we went back to the hotel and we sat for 5 minutes and went back. It was that interesting. We wanted to see everything. And everything is there, and every country is represented. It's so global at this point that there are people representing products from other countries that don't even speak English.
We were shopping for new equipment for the studio here, which is why we need you guys' support out there.
Absolutely.
To help us get the latest and greatest. We found some stuff within our means, within our budget, and some of the guys were bringing up the interface, and it was like, it was in Japanese characters, and so that's how diverse. We talked to companies from Australia, companies from Dutch companies, German companies, Spanish companies even. All the great toys are there, all the toys necessary for broadcasting.
And that's the thing, we're doing a major, like you mentioned, a major build-out of additional studio. And
it's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be a great studio. It's going to really help us with what we're covering. It's going to allow us to do more reports because we can do things simultaneously with multiple studios. It's really important for people to support us at INFOWARS store.
But see, all that equipment is what draws the representatives from the media there. There was representatives from every corner of the earth.
Yeah, and the products that were there, the technology that was there, at some point it was like you jumped into the ocean and there are all these weird fish because the technology, some of it was a niche that hadn't been hit yet, and you know, some of it made sense that they were making that and some of it didn't, you know. And as he said, the folks that we met, they were very nice, but you know, they mainly spoke Japanese, so customer service would have been an issue.
That's right.
But,
well, tell us what you saw there, because you know, it was interesting because this was a bunch of broadcasters that were there, and you saw a very interesting news event. And
news outlets there, yeah. There was a lot of people out there talking about, you know, their news product, their news as a product, essentially.
Right. They're packaging their show for redistribution.
Yeah, and there was. The place was packed with media representatives, news people, you know, people who are supposed to be telling human stories from around the globe. And then right outside, we were trying to make a point of you know, the consolidation of media into less and less hands and tighter and tighter controls over the message. And as we're doing our stand-ups outside, we came across a human story right outside that nobody in the building was paying any attention to, and none of the local media. John jumped right in with these people too, and
I guess it's kind of boring. People don't really, you know, you turn on your TV and you don't really realize what's going on, and yeah, it looks good, you know, on my 1080 HD TV and everything. And I'm not going to complain about it, but the truth of the matter is that in 1983, and you're going to hear this in the piece coming up, in 1983 there were 50 corporations, and today there are only 5. There's actually 6. GE, NBC is actually a minor player, but really there's 5. And we actually ran into a woman from Fox News who was a higher up, you remember? And she said she didn't want to be on camera. She said that she would personally hear it from Rupert, but she said that we were doing a great job, keep up the good work. She's really proud of us and alternative media rising like it is.
That's great. And just today, Ben Swan was on the radio show with Alex, and he's leaving a Fox News affiliate because they're putting pressure on him as to what he can say and do, right? Said, you know, don't go on Alex's show.
Because they wanted to focus locally, and he wanted to
right.
focus on a global message.
That's right. Yeah.
We all should pay attention to, and injecting that into
but I think they put some pressure on him not to go on Alex's show or something. Did he say that? Or maybe maybe I'm wrong about that, but I don't know.
He's getting pressure. He can't discuss.
They didn't want him doing interviews, but the bottom line is, he's moving out into an alternative media as well, and it's really important that develop, because mainstream media is not covering stories like the next one you guys came across.
Well, the alternative media really is this monster that's coming out of the death created by the death of the Fairness Doctrine and the Telecommunications Act of 1996. The Fairness Doctrine, pretty much the FCC said every community needs to have a voice, and it needs to be balanced, and it needs to be represented. Well, the NAB, personally, their organization comes along and says, we don't want these voices on the air anymore. But, they did the Hegelian thing where they said, we're going to take care of it where it's regulated, and we'll make sure, the cream of the crop of these voices gets on the air, and they're still represented. Well, about 5 years later, after they pretty much destroyed the Fairness Doctrine, those voices were gone, and they're gone today. And now the Telecommunications Act of 96, we're seeing that big time, especially in music. The Telecommunications Act of 96, years ago, you could own a certain amount of radio stations in a major market. I think it was 3. And then you could own a smattering of smaller, minor markets. I think it was maybe 12. They deregulated the whole thing. And so Cumulus and Clear Channel bought up especially Clear Channel, bought up all of the radio stations across the country. And just to give you an example, the effect that had locally was in Minot, North Dakota, a train overturned, and it had all these toxic chemicals on it, and it just spilled out into the community for days. And there's nobody at the station. It's just automated. And also what that does to our culture locally is we used to have, before the Telecommunications Act of 96, we had regional voices from our communities. You had an Austin style of music. You had a New Orleans style of music. You had an LA style of music. And these regional voices went out to the larger voice, which used to be music television or VH1 or so on. But the Grammys were full of talent that was regionally being created by these communities. And now, since it's so homogenized, we don't even really realize it. You turn on your radio, your classic radio, and you're like, oh, great, 38 special for the 1200th time. That's awesome. I can't wait to hear that again. I'm being sarcastic. There are these voices out there that were musicians, and musicians get a lot more listeners than politicians. So I think the Telecommunications Act of 96 was basically almost a form of communism in the way that it just put a stranglehold on the regional, local, community voices of America and in American music and creative people. And now here we are in this homogenized world where the people representing us musically are completely outward.
So you're seeing the same thing in music that you see in news and in other television broadcasting, that sort of things, massive,
and microcosms, and they're all connected together into this giant macrocosm.
And of course you see that also happening in retail. I mean, it's hardly any segment of society that you don't see this massive consolidation under the control of just a few corporations, It's great to see in Austin that there's a thriving music scene. And there's a thriving independent restaurant scene when I came here. There's a lot of micro-entrepreneurs that are here. That's very unusual, though.
Yeah, it is unusual. And people
didn't see it in other parts of the country.
We're pretty much spoiled here in Austin. There are other areas in the country like Monterey, California, There are
Athens, Georgia.
Athens, Georgia. There are areas in the country where there's a big, public radio presence, and there's local public radio presence, and there's also they appreciate and respect real musicians, and there are a lot of great musicians out there that no one has any idea who they are because they're not on the radio, they're not on MTV or on the TV, they're not at the Grammys, but they're out there and they're incredibly talented, and the history of American music continues.
Well, tell us a little bit about you want to go to your report, or you want to tell us a little bit about what you saw with this other news event besides the consolidation story that you guys were covering?
Oh, it was just kind of a bizarre, ironic event. As we left NAB and we attempted to get these media people who were just aimlessly walking around in their own little reality, like, they're incredibly important, and they had nothing to say.
They had nothing to say.
They had nothing to say about media. Here they are. They're from media, and they won't talk to us. I mean,
about media.
We can go out on the street and we can pull people in. I mean, literally, we must have asked like 30 people, and they were all just too good for us, except for the woman that talked off camera.
They were on vacation in Vegas.
Yeah, right.
So
what did you see in the street?
Well, so as we're leaving that, we did get to talk to one guy, but as we're leaving that, and you'll see him in the piece, we come around the corner, and there's this guy, and he's holding an American flag, remember? And I said, oh, that's a nice flag, and then...
You're like, I bet that guy has an opinion.
Yeah, I bet he has an opinion. And he walks ahead of us, and all of a sudden we're in this big protest right there in the middle of Las Vegas in front of the convention center.
At the main entrance, too.
Which is totally ironic.
On all four corners of the intersection there.
So the news is going on right under their nose.
Right in front of them.
Right in front of the...
And it was right when the convention was shutting down, so the people were drizzling out of the convention center, getting in the cabs right next to these people protesting this injustice being done to them through the cab companies.
And looking back, I wish we got more B-roll of those people leaving, because they're just hollow.
So you guys covered this. You want to intro the piece, or just go straight into it?
Absolutely. This piece that we put together was quickly put together, and we really enjoyed putting it together. But it's a message about the media that we're going to present more. We're going to go more in depth in the future and really expose. But these are the fundamentals of the problem here, basically, in this package.
All right, let's take a look at that.
John Bound for the INFOWARS Nightly News. Behind me is the Las Vegas Convention Center, where a five-headed hydra has rested itself for the remainder of the week. Now, there are a lot of good people in there with a lot of great ideas and a lot of great technology, but they have no idea that they serve a dark lord, a cartel known as the five controlling corporations of the media. They include Time Warner, they include Viacom, Disney, Bertelsmann, and News Corp. In 1983, there were 50. Today, there are 5.
Was anyone watching this report alive in 1983? Does the current state of media seem vastly different to you? We once had competition. We had regionalism. We had success based on talent, writing, and public outcry. As a corporatocracy gained ground, it required its singular voice to be heard. But in order to shove their elitist plastic propaganda in our faces, things had to change for the average American. And while we slept, it did. In the mid-1980s, the National Association of Broadcasters launched a campaign to repeal the Fairness Doctrine. The Fairness Doctrine required the holders of broadcast licenses to both present controversial issues of public importance and to do so in a manner that was, in the Commission's view, honest, equitable, and balanced. With the NAB's insistence, the FCC decided to eliminate the doctrine in 1987. Civic discussions among the people of a free and democratic society fizzled out and died.
Anybody want to talk about alternative media? Alternative media. Anybody? Or are you all slaves to 5 corporations?
I would assume that alternative media is trying to get the truth versus, what the big companies are doing. I believe that's probably, the biggest thing about it is, the other side of the story, or the truth, or whatever. Because a lot of the time they'll just cut it out, like you're going to do with video. You're going to cut certain things out, whatever. But they do it on a scale, the big companies, where they can actually manipulate it.
Then Clinton ushered in a complete monopoly by signing the Telecommunications Act of 1996. The act basically allowed the regulated ownership of regional media to be bought up by the massive Clear Channel and Cumulus radio chains, playing automated music from the early 90s and earlier, while future musicians literally must sell their souls to their Illuminati masters to achieve success. As we left the NAB conference, we ran into the ironic event of a taxi protest.
We are forced to work 72 hours every week. It's like we don't make a living wage. We make under a minimum wage, and it's unfair. The media is boycotting us.
We have been on strike for 5 weeks. Very little media coverage. And the reason why is because these same companies gave $500,000 contributions to Governor Sandoval.
Local news, I tried to call them and they told me they're too busy trying to find Weather Channel. Yesterday was a bit cloudy and rainy.
The success of alternative media dwarfs the numbers of MSNBC, and it is rising.
Will the alternative media be heralded as a renaissance of sorts? Or will it be swallowed up by the beast in the machine, the five-headed hydra of the media cartel? John Bound, INFOWARS Nightly News.
Wow, that was interesting. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that protest, we spoke with a guy afterwards, and, we were noticing that there was just one ethnicity there. And a guy approached us who was with the protest, and he said...
He was a big fan of the Alex Jones show.
Yeah.
He knew who I was, and I'm never on camera.
Yeah.
So he was a big fan.
It's growing. So he comes and tells us that they're mainly Ethiopian, and that they thought the Ethiopians would be, very docile and submissive.
Compliant, yeah.
But here they were for 5 weeks protesting against, 72-hour work weeks, no bathroom breaks, and what they were saying was below minimum wage. And he also made the point that the Asian community was still driving the cabs. They weren't compliant.
So they were
compliant.
Culturally, they were immigrants, but they were used to that kind of treatment, that sweatshop kind of workmanship. Just shove them in, get them to work, chain their kids up to a pole, I guess, and
send them off. They've been under the heel of tyranny for so long. That's one of the reasons why the globalists picked China to move all of our industry to, because they knew they could exploit them like that. And they would put up with it somewhat. But the Ethiopians were having a hard time with it.
Yeah.
They weren't putting up with it. The guy said they wouldn't put up with the S word. He said they weren't going to put up with that. So
good for them. Yeah.
They took to the streets and they were telling people as loud as they could exactly what was going on.
There was nobody covering this.
But there was nobody there to listen. But them and us.
One of the guys in that piece, he says, I called the local news and they had to cover the weather. They told him.
Well, see, that's just it. Most of the news channels, local news channels, they're going to be covering the packages that are delivered to them, right? It's going to be the stuff that comes down from the corporate news media.
That's what happens. I mean, John and I both have newsroom experience in other newsrooms. Yeah. And there was segments devoted to the feed. You would spend, a certain time during the day, you would get a feed from the network. And they say, here's the packages that you're going to run. And they send them to everybody, all the affiliates on the tape. You put in your tape, you capture the feed as it comes down, and you've got 2 to 3 segments of your news product ready to go, already made.
No local opinion. I mean, if we had an opinion on, say, Second Amendment here in Austin, it wouldn't be it won't be represented anymore on the local news.
It's a very effective control strategy if you stop and think about it. It's not just what they tell people, but when you have the same stories being covered everywhere, from the same perspective, the same angle, telling you the same thing about it.
Milquetoast stories, too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It makes you think as a viewer
everybody hears that, and it's like, I'm hearing the same thing from everybody but you guys. you must be conspiracy theorists.
Right.
Because you're actually going out and covering the raw material, right? You're actually doing the reporting, and it's something that's completely different than you're hearing anywhere else, you know, that just like doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's the voice of the people that's being subverted through this practice of the news product. There's a message that needs to be put out, and it's not what the people are talking about. It's what you know, the corporate agendas that need to get pushed out. How do you grow your market base? You know, you have to convince them of certain lefts, rights, right or wrongs, and the way to do that is to feed them the right stories to drive them in that direction.
It reminds me of what people talk about with movies, theatrical movies, how truth is stranger than fiction. You know, you go out and you take a true story. If you're really close and accurate, it's much more interesting than some kind of a fictional narrative that's cooked up out of Hollywood. You know, and if you go out and you cover what's really happening in the world, and you do it honestly, and you do it from the perspective of what people want to know about, it's a lot more interesting than this dumbed down, homogenized narrative that comes from the corporate newsrooms and then filters down through the hierarchy to the local news stations.
Well, it's a lot more exciting to live your life as somebody with your own mind, your own free will and creativity than to be some kind of sheep that will just take anything and think that safety in numbers is what's going to make your life meaningful, when in fact you're going to be dead real soon. We all are. And did you live your life to the fullest with creativity, with what you believed in, to being true to yourself, or did you just give in to what they wanted you to be?
Well, I think content is going to win out. You know, I mean, Alex's show, his whole, you know, the radio show, the news and everything, it's sticky content. If you can get somebody there, they see it, they see something that's different, they investigate it, they find out that, yeah, there's actually links that show the purchases of the 1.6 billion bullets. They actually link to it. We actually footnote our stuff because it's so hard for people to believe the truth after they've been fed this dumbed down, homogenized stuff. We have to footnote it, so we do.
That's funny. There was a guy we met in Vegas after the night was over. You know, we saddled up to the bar, had a couple of drinks, met some people, and one guy knew about INFOWARS, but all he knew about was the cover story from other sources. So he and I were engaging in some conversations about what our message was, and he was surprised. He said, you know, I had no idea that anybody from INFOWARS would sound like this, or you know, the stories were backed up with factual documents.
Because he'd been presented with a straw man.
Because he'd been told, yeah, he'd been told
right.
by outside sources, oh, don't listen to that, it's conspiracy theory crap. And I would tell him, like, yeah, there's actual documents. There's purchase orders for the bullets from on the government's own websites. All of our stuff is backed up factually, and we're saying things that...
Or we wouldn't be here.
Or we wouldn't be here.
You know, we'd be the National Enquirer. We'd be getting sued by, you know, Carol Burnett or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thanks, guys. That was really interesting. You know, it's very important. We're trying to stay at top of our game to try to, like I said, have multiple studios so we can do more reports and do a better professional job of it. And it's real important work out there, and it's great that you guys cover the story that other people won't cover. That's an important thing. Well, you know, it's very important to not have just a homogenized fictional narrative in many cases, but to get a different perspective on the news. And we do our best to try to give you the news as accurately as possible and try to cover the things that we think you're interested in, things that are going to affect your freedom, your prosperity, your health. And so if you are watching this on YouTube, help us with a subscription to Prison Planet TV. You can buy one of these and you can pass it out to 10 different people can be watching this at the same time. The other thing that we do is we put out a magazine each month, and that's a great way to reach people as well. One of the things about print magazines, you know, they're dying left and right, but we think it's because of content. And I think we've got some really compelling content in the INFOWARS magazine that comes out each month. You can also pick up that in various quantities. You can become a micro distributor. So go to INFOWARS.com and support us. We depend on your contribution and on your purchases to fund our operations. That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night at 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.
the legislative text of that very provision.
Well, that effort by Senator Mike Lee and Senator Rand Paul to try to slow things down so that people know exactly what's in this failed. And it failed with the help of 16 Republicans. In an article on INFOWARS, Treason Alert, Democrats try to move gun bill forward without allowing senators to read it. You'll see a list there, the 16 senators. And there's some quotes there that are kind of interesting. Mike Lee says, "We're trying to prevent the ability of members to push through legislation before anyone has had time to read and evaluate the language. As of this morning, as of this very moment, not a single senator has been provided the legislative text." And even Dianne Feinstein said, well, I haven't seen the bill, so I'm going to reserve my concerns. I only know what people have told me. We've seen this all before. We saw it with Obamacare. And we've seen what we're seeing here, and take a look at these 16 senators here, because these are the senators that I like to call, many of them are the NDAA wing of the Republican Party. These are people like Richard Burr out of North Carolina, Lindsey Graham, John McCain, and joined in all of this is a new senator, Pat Toomey, relatively new, who has joined with Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, and they've put forward a background check bill into this that is something that we should all be very concerned about. Even the ACLU is concerned about a national registry, and when you have the ACLU, no friend of the Second Amendment, joining with the NRA, concerned about the civil liberties ramifications of this, that's something you should be worried about. But these are senators who are not concerned about our civil liberties. They've come after the Fourth Amendment. They don't care about your right to be searched in the airports. They don't care about your due process in the Sixth Amendment. They put up the NDAA. And now they're coming after the Second Amendment, banning this to get people, entrap people that have just had antidepressant medication, and to expand that to everybody that's in their family. So this is something that we really need to be concerned about, because this is something that is having the guns taken away from people who are not found guilty of a crime or a felony. They're just people who have been reported by a psychiatrist or mental health official, and we need to be very concerned about that. Even if the NRA supports that, I don't think that is something that we should be comfortable with, that people lose their due process. Also in there are, as a third thing in this list, is armed prosecutors being, it's a possible amendment that may come in, that is, armed prosecutors may be allowed to carry weapons, because we've just had two recent shootings here in Texas, one of them a prosecutor, a judge, and another law enforcement person. They're going to give, though, special favors to law enforcement personnel. They're going to be a special class of person. So while you and I will lose our rights to keep and bear arms, we're going to see law enforcement officials at the state and federal level get special privileges, and not only would they be allowed to carry weapons, but this proposed amendment would allow them to carry and obtain any ammunition magazine of any size. So we see all kinds of exemptions being put in for government officials. We see essentially a two-class structure here of who is allowed to own firearms and who isn't. But don't worry about that. According to Biden, this is all just in your imagination, and they would never take away your firearms. Remember, he made those promises early on, but now he says anybody that's concerned about gun control, about gun confiscation, about losing your gun rights, that's part of the black helicopter crowd. And Jakari Jackson has a report on that.
Let me read some of the...
And these are senators who, like Senator Burr out of North Carolina, I know from having lived in North Carolina that he voted for TARP, is also a supporter of NDAA, and he even introduced and sponsored a bill to punish whistleblowers. We don't want anybody like Bradley Manning who's going to tell us what the government is really up to. Those types of people need to be punished severely, according to Richard Burr. Well, we've got also some information about what amendments may be coming up on this, and this is something we need to watch closely. Harry Reid has said he's going to keep the amendment process open, and Roll Call magazine talks about some of the things that may be coming up, some of the amendments that may be coming up. Some of these are good amendments, possibly won't be passed. The first one is a concealed carry amendment, which would essentially stop people who have a concealed carry permit from being harangued if they travel into a state like New York, for example. A lot of people have run afoul of New York laws because they had weapons in their trunk that were safely stored that other states would recognize, or because of their concealed carry, they're not allowed to carry in New York. It becomes a tripwire, traveling from state to state and having different gun laws in each of those states. But number 2 on this list is one of the things I want to take a quick look at, and that's the mental health records provision. Now, this is something that is being put forward by a lot of Republicans, and Democrats are backing away from this. But and also is supported by the NRA. But I find it troubling, and we should all be very concerned about this push to try to deflect some of the regulations onto people who are mentally disturbed, for example. As we pointed out, the people who are doing these mass shootings are typically on psychotropic drugs that are prescribed by the psychiatric people, and this is something that, you know, they're Welcome to the INFOWARS Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's Friday, April the 12th, 2013, and here are our top stories.
Tonight, treason alert. Democrats try to move gun bill forward without allowing senators to read it. Then, a shocking UN report covers up Barack Obama's role in arming terrorists. And who gave North Korea nukes in the first place? Find out tonight on the INFOWARS Nightly News.
Well, in a tactic we've seen before when Obamacare was passed, we now see the Democrats with their next signature transformation of our society, gun control, doing the same thing. That is, introducing a giant bill and trying to cram it through before anybody really knows what's in it. Or as Nancy Pelosi says, we have to pass it so we can find out what's in it.
These are the rights that we're trying to protect by requiring a 60-vote threshold on any new gun control legislation. And in so doing, we're trying to prevent the ability of members to push through legislation before anyone has had time to read and evaluate the language. And yet, as of this morning, as of this very moment, not a single senator has been provided.
Things they're saying about background checks. They say, quote, we, the federal government, want to put every private firearms transaction right under the thumb of the federal government and keep all those names in a massive federal registry. Kind of scary, man. Black helicopter crowd really is upset.
I'm Jakari Jackson with an INFOWARS News Bulletin. Vice President Joe Biden is once again criticizing those concerned about their Second Amendment rights, calling them, quote, the black helicopter crowd. Now, INFOWARS has well documented how black helicopters are very much real and active in the United States.
Helicopters and the sound of gunfire created a lot of concern this afternoon in one Houston neighborhood.
It's a joint military training exercise involving local police, also military, as someone shot some video of some of these choppers, military-style choppers.
If you see military helicopters flying low over Minneapolis, do not be alarmed. They are training in an urban environment. The U.S. Special Operations Command will be conducting these exercises until the beginning of September.
Now let's take a look at a different part of Biden's speech where he says not only is there no FBI database of firearm purchases, according to him, the FBI shreds purchase information immediately after processing.
And within 24 hours of being told that you can sell that gun, the FBI must destroy the information. There is no record kept.
And this reporter may have been fooled by Biden's rhetoric had it not been for these articles. Even Congress wants to know what the NSA is doing with its $2 billion Utah spy center, ATF to spy on gun owners via massive database, Big Sis Snitch program to help enforce gun control, U.S. to let spy agencies scour Americans' finances, And Utah welcomes NSA Mega Snoop Center.